What is the most expensive mistake a person can make at their job? For senior flight attendant Caroline Hayes, it wasn't a number that could be calculated in dollars, but in the complete and utter destruction of her career. One morning, fueled by a deep-seated prejudice, she decided a young black woman was unworthy of her first-class seat. In a stunning display of arrogance, before a lounge full of passengers, she ripped the woman's ticket to pieces. What she didn't know was that her target was the daughter of the man who owned the entire airline, and her vicious act of hate was about to trigger a devastating, life-altering dose of karma. The Aura Airlines International First Class Lounge at John F. Kennedy International Airport was an oasis of curated tranquility. Muted jazz piano notes danced in the air, mingling with the scent of freshly brewed espresso and expensive leather. Businessmen in tailored suits murmured into their phones, while elegantly dressed couples sipped champagne, their conversation a low, contented hum. It was a world away from the chaotic hustle of the main terminal, a sanctuary for the privileged few. And in Caroline Hayes' mind, Maya Washington did not belong. Caroline, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a face permanently etched with faint disapproval, moved through the lounge with an air of proprietorship. She had been a flight attendant for 22 years, 15 of them as a senior crew member on the coveted transatlantic routes. She saw this lounge and the first-class cabin of the Boeing 707 she was about to command as her domain. Her standards were exacting, her judgment swift, and her prejudices deeply ingrained. She first noticed Maya curled up in a plush armchair in a quiet corner. The young woman was dressed in stylish, comfortable travel wear. Charcoal gray joggers from a high-end athleisure brand, a simple white top, and a beautifully tailored black blazer. On her feet were pristine sneakers that likely cost more than Caroline's monthly grocery bill. Her hair was styled in intricate box braids, adorned with a few delicate gold cuffs that caught the light. She was engrossed in a thick textbook, its pages filled with complex diagrams of structural engineering. Beside her sat a sleek carbon fiber drafting tube. To an unbiased eye, she was the picture of modern, casual elegance, a young professional or a student at a prestigious university. To Caroline, she was an anomaly, an error in the carefully constructed social algorithm of the first-class experience. Caroline's gaze swept over Maya, and her internal monologue began its toxic churn. Probably a musician or some kind of influencer. Got a rich boyfriend to pay her way. They get everything handed to them. For the next hour, Caroline made her presence felt. While she offered effusive, top-up service to the white passengers, her service to Maya was clipped and perfunctory. When Maya requested a bottle of sparkling water, Caroline returned with still water and set it on the table without a word. When Maya went to the buffet to grab a small plate of fruit, Caroline materialized beside her, ostensibly to straighten a stack of napkins, but her eyes were cold and watchful. Maya, for her part, was not oblivious. She had navigated these undercurrents of prejudice her entire life. As the daughter of Robert Washington, the self-made billionaire founder and CEO of Aura Airlines, she had been raised in a world of immense privilege. But her father, a man who had clawed his way up from poverty, had ensured his children understood that their skin color would, for some, always precede their status. He taught them to meet prejudice not with anger, but with unassailable grace and intelligence. So Maya ignored Caroline. She was too focused, too excited. She was flying to London to represent her university, Columbia, in the final round of the prestigious International Architectural Design Competition. Her project, a revolutionary design for a sustainable, modular, urban housing unit, had already beaten thousands of entries. This trip was the culmination of 2 years of relentless work. A prickly flight attendant was a minor inconvenience. The call for boarding for Flight 104 to London, Heathrow crackled softly through the lounge. Maya carefully packed her book, slipped her laptop into her carry-on, and picked up her drafting tube. She approached the gate desk at the exit of the lounge, where Caroline was now standing, scanning boarding passes with a practiced, almost bored efficiency. Maya handed over her passport and first-class boarding pass. Caroline took them, her eyes flicking from the name, Maya C. Washington, to Maya's face, and then back again. A small, cruel smirk played on her lips. "Of course, you would be in first class," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial, as if sharing a private joke with an invisible companion. Maya's back stiffened. The directness of it after an hour of passive aggression was startling. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice perfectly even. "Seat 2A, Caroline continued, her tone now shifting to one of saccharine condescension. "It's a lovely seat. Lots of legroom. You must be very excited." She drew the word out, loading it with insinuation. "I am," Maya replied coolly. "It's an important trip for my studies." "Studies," Caroline repeated, as if the word were foreign. She tapped the boarding pass against her manicured nails. "It's just that we've had a few issues recently with fraudulent tickets, especially for the premium cabins. The system flags certain discrepancies, and we have to be very, very careful." The implication was as clear as it was grotesque. Caroline was suggesting the ticket was fake, that Maya's presence was a discrepancy. A middle-aged man in a pinstripe suit, Mr. Peterson, who was standing behind Maya, shifted uncomfortably. "Is there a problem with her ticket?" he asked, his voice betraying his annoyance at the delay. Caroline ignored him, her eyes locked on Maya. "I'll just need to verify this. It will take a moment." She turned to her computer terminal, typed for a few seconds, and then frowned theatrically. That's odd. The system seems to be having trouble confirming the payment method. It's, unusual." This was a blatant lie. Maya's ticket had been booked and paid for months ago, directly through her father's executive office, as all his family's travel was. It was as legitimate as a ticket could be. "I can assure you the ticket is fully paid for," Maya said, her patience beginning to fray. "My name is Maya Washington. You can look me up. The confirmation code is right there." "Oh, I'm sure you think it is, dear," Caroline cooed. The use of the patronizing term was like a slap in the face. "But these online scams are very sophisticated. People buy stolen credit card numbers. You'd be surprised what goes on." The line of first-class passengers was growing. Mr. Peterson cleared his throat loudly. "Ma'am, I'm going to miss my connection in London if we don't board soon. Can't you sort this out?" Caroline shot him a venomous look before turning back to Maya. Her frustration at being challenged, combined with her deep-seated prejudice, was reaching a boiling point. She felt her authority being questioned, her perfect little kingdom being invaded. In her mind, Maya was not just a passenger. She was a symbol of everything Caroline resented: youth, beauty, and what she perceived as unearned privilege. "You know what?" Caroline said, her voice suddenly sharp and decisive. "I'm not going to let you disrupt the boarding process for my other passengers." And then, in a shocking act of aggression that silenced the entire lounge, Caroline Hayes took Maya Washington's first-class boarding pass and, with a sharp, deliberate twist of her wrists, ripped it in two. She then ripped the two halves into quarters, the sound of tearing paper echoing in the stunned silence. She dropped the confetti of what was once a $14,000 ticket onto the polished granite countertop. "Unfortunately," Caroline announced with a triumphant, chilling smile, "this ticket is invalid. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside. Security can help you purchase a new ticket in economy if any seats are still available." For a moment, no one moved. The air was thick with disbelief. Maya stared at the pieces of her ticket, then up at the smug, hateful face of the woman who had just, she thought, destroyed her chance to get to London. Maya felt a surge of hot anger, but her father's voice echoed in her head. "Grace and intelligence. Let them build their own gallows." She took a slow, deep breath. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached calmly into her handbag and pulled out her phone. Her expression was no longer one of a flustered student, but of something else entirely. It was calm, focused, and utterly resolute. Caroline watched her, mistaking her composure for defeat. "Calling for help," she taunted softly. "I'm afraid no one can help you now." Maya looked up from her phone, her gaze meeting Caroline's. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an extraordinary weight. "I'm not calling for help. I'm calling human resources." And with that, she pressed the call button on a name saved in her favorites. David Chen, VP of Operations, Aura Airlines. Caroline's smug smile faltered, just for a second. A tiny cold seed of doubt had been planted in the barren soil of her certainty. But it was too late. The powder keg had been lit, and the fuse was burning very, very fast. The atmosphere in the lounge had shifted from quiet luxury to tense, awkward theater. The other passengers averted their eyes, some pretending to be engrossed in their phones, others whispering to their companions. Mr. Peterson, however, stood his ground, watching the scene with a look of undisguised disgust aimed squarely at Caroline. "This is an outrage," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I am a Diamond Medallion member with this airline, and I have never witnessed such unprofessional and, frankly, discriminatory behavior." Caroline, flustered by the direct accusation and the unexpected phone call Maya was making, rounded on him. "Sir, this is an official airline matter concerning security protocols. It does not concern you. Please board the aircraft." "I'll board when I'm good and ready," Mr. Peterson retorted, crossing his arms. "And I'll be filing a formal complaint about this. I want your name." "Caroline Hayes, senior flight attendant," she snapped, her composure cracking. She felt a surge of panic. A complaint from a top-tier frequent flyer was serious, but she had gone too far to back down now. She had to see this through, to prove she was right. She glanced at Maya, who was now speaking softly into her phone. "Hi, David. It's Maya Washington." "Yes, Robert's daughter. I'm fine, thank you. But I'm afraid I've run into a bit of a situation at the JFK first-class lounge. Yes, for Flight 104 to Heathrow. Well, to be precise, the senior flight attendant, a Miss Caroline Hayes, has just ripped up my boarding pass." Maya paused, listening to the frantic voice on the other end of the line. "No, I'm not on the plane. She's refusing me entry. She claims my ticket is fraudulent." "Yes, I'll hold." Every word Maya spoke landed like a hammer blow on Caroline's carefully constructed reality. Robert's daughter. The name echoed in her mind. Robert, as in Robert Washington, the CEO, the man whose face was on the cover of Forbes and Time magazine, celebrated as a titan of industry, the founder of this very airline? It couldn't be. It was a bluff, a trick. This girl was an imposter, a con artist trying to use the CEO's name to bully her way onto a flight. Caroline's panic morphed back into righteous indignation, the sheer audacity. "A very clever tactic," Caroline said, her voice shaking slightly. "Name-dropping the CEO. I'm sure that works for you in restaurants, but this is an international airline, young lady. We have security." As if on cue, two uniformed airport security officers appeared at the lounge entrance. Caroline had called them moments before ripping the ticket, a preemptive move to have Maya removed. "Ma'am, you called for security?" one of the officers asked, his hand resting on his belt. "Yes, thank you for your prompt arrival," Caroline said, her confidence surging back. This was her turf, her authority being validated. "This individual is attempting to gain access to the aircraft with what I believe to be a fraudulent ticket. When I challenged her, she became agitated and started making threats, claiming to be related to our CEO. I need her escorted from the premises." The officers looked from Caroline's indignant face to Maya, who was still calmly holding her phone to her ear. She looked anything but agitated. She looked powerful. "Ma'am, is this true?" the first officer asked Maya. Before Maya could answer, a man in a sharp suit, his face pale and beaded with sweat, came sprinting into the lounge. He bypassed the desk and came to a skidding halt, his eyes wide with panic. It was David Chen, the vice president of operations, a man Caroline knew by sight but had never spoken to. He was one of the highest-ranking executives at JFK. He completely ignored Caroline and the security guards. His focus was solely on Maya. "Ms. Washington, Maya," he panted, slightly out of breath. "I am so sorry. I came as fast as I could. Is everything all right? Are you all right?" Maya gave him a small, reassuring smile. "I'm fine, David. A little delayed, but fine." David Chen's eyes then fell on the pile of paper scraps on the counter. His face went from pale to ashen. He looked at Caroline as if seeing a ghost. "What is this?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Caroline's world began to tilt on its axis. The sight of a corporate vice president treating this young woman with such deference and panic sent a jolt of pure terror through her. The pieces started to connect in her mind, forming a picture of catastrophic, career-ending horror. I determined the ticket to be invalid, Mr. Chen," she stammered, her voice suddenly small and reedy. There were Irregularities. I was following protocol. David Chen slowly turned his head to face her. His expression was no longer panicked. It was glacial. It was the face of a man looking at something utterly contemptible. Protocol, he said, his voice dangerously low. You are Caroline Hayes, correct? He didn't wait for an answer. Our protocol, Ms. Hayes, is to verify passenger information discreetly and respectfully. Our protocol is to use the multiple redundant systems we have in place to confirm a booking, not to make wild, unfounded accusations based on… What exactly? He gestured towards Maya. Based on what, Mrs. Hayes? Caroline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The reason was so ugly, so deeply buried in her own bitter psyche that she couldn't possibly speak it aloud. David Chen didn't need her to. He knew. Everyone there knew. He turned to the security officers. Gentlemen, thank you for your time, but there has been a grave misunderstanding. You are not needed here. He then looked at Caroline, and his voice dropped even further, becoming a blade of ice. Ms. Hayes, hand me your airline ID and your passport. You are to be escorted to the JFK corporate office. Now, you will not be operating Flight 104. You will not be operating any flight ever again. The finality in his voice was absolute. This wasn't a suspension. It was an execution. But my crew, the flight, Caroline mumbled, her mind reeling. Your crew will be informed that you've had a sudden personal emergency. A replacement senior attendant is already on their way from standby, David said dismissively. He then turned his full attention back to Maya, his demeanor softening instantly. Maya, I cannot apologize enough. Your father is on the line. He's on his way to the airport. The mention of her father finally shattered Maya's composure. The stress and humiliation of the last hour washed over her, and her eyes welled up. This wasn't about a ruined trip anymore. It was about the deep, painful sting of being judged and dismissed so hatefully. David Chen gently guided her towards a private suite within the lounge. Let's get you away from this, he said softly. As she was led away, Caroline Hayes stood frozen, watching her 22-year career evaporate before her eyes. The security guards now flanked her, their expressions grim. She looked down at the shredded remains of the first-class ticket, the symbol of her hubris. And for the first time, she felt the sickening, vertiginous sensation of a free fall, with no safety net in sight. The ground was coming up to meet her, and it was going to be a very, very hard landing. The private suite was a world within a world. Soundproof walls blocked out the airport's hum, and a single large window overlooked the tarmac, where the gleaming Boeing 700 ME-7 destined for London was being prepared for its journey. A journey Maya was supposed to be on. David Chen had brought her a cup of chamomile tea and a fresh bottle of water. He had already dispatched an assistant to print a new boarding pass and to personally retrieve Maya's single check bag from the cargo hold. Flight 104 would be held, no matter how long it took. Maya sat on a plush sofa, her phone clutched in her hand. Her father's voice, usually a source of calm strength, was tight with a controlled fury she hadn't heard in years. Are you sure you're okay, sweetheart? Robert Washington asked, his voice crackling slightly through the phone's speaker. He was in his car, and she could hear the wail of a siren as his driver cut through Manhattan traffic. I'm okay, Dad. Really, I'm more… I don't know. Disappointed, she said, her voice a little shaky. Disappointed doesn't begin to cover it, Robert growled. I built Aura from the ground up on one core principle, dignity. That every single person who steps into our terminals, who flies on our planes, is treated with absolute respect. That this happened in my own house to my own daughter, it's a cancer, and I'm going to cut it out. What's going to happen to her? Maya asked, looking out the window. She saw the ground crew moving about, oblivious to the drama that had unfolded inside. That's not for you to worry about right now. David is handling the immediate situation. The rest is for me to handle. There was a chilling finality to his tone. 20 minutes later, Robert Washington strode into the suite. He was a tall, imposing man in his early 60s, with a neatly trimmed graying beard and eyes that held both immense warmth and the sharp, calculating glint of a CEO who commanded a global empire. He wore a simple dark gray suit, but he carried an aura of power that was unmistakable. He didn't say a word. He just walked over to Maya, wrapped his arms around her, and held her tight. In that moment, she wasn't a brilliant architecture student or the daughter of a billionaire. She was just a girl who needed her dad. "I'm sorry, Maya," he whispered into her hair. "I'm sorry this world is still a place where you have to endure this." He pulled back, his expression hardening as he turned to David Chen. "Report." David, who had been standing respectfully by the door, stepped forward with a tablet. "Sir, Caroline Hayes has been relieved of her duties and is currently with HR and our head of security in the corporate wing. Her union representative has been contacted. Mr. Peterson, the passenger who witnessed the event, has provided a written statement and his contact information. He's adamant about testifying. Several other passengers have also come forward to the new gate agent, corroborating the story. The entire incident, from her first snide comment to her ripping the ticket, was captured on the lounge's high-definition security camera, with audio." Robert nodded slowly, absorbing the information. "Good. I want a full internal investigation launched, not just into Hayes. I want to see her entire employment record. Every complaint, every commendation, every performance review. I want to know if there were prior incidents, any red flags that HR might have missed or ignored. This doesn't happen in a vacuum, David." "Already on it, sir," David replied. "We're pulling her file as we speak." "And what about this flight?" Robert asked, gesturing towards the window. "We've held it, sir. We can have Maya on board in 10 minutes. Robert looked at his daughter. Her face was pale and the excitement that had animated her earlier was gone, replaced by a weary sadness. "Do you want to get on that plane, Maya?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then shook her head. "No, not that one. I don't want to walk past that crew knowing what happened. I don't want to sit in that seat feeling like this." Robert nodded in understanding. "Of course not." He turned back to David. "Get the Gulfstream ready, the G650. File a flight plan for London Luton. Have a car waiting to take her directly to her hotel. She's been through enough for one day. Let Flight 104 depart." David's eyes widened slightly. The G650 was Robert Washington's personal jet, the crown jewel of Aura's private fleet. Mobilizing it on a moment's notice was a massive logistical undertaking, but it was also a statement. "Right away, sir," David said, already tapping furiously on his tablet. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless office in the airport's corporate annex, Caroline Hayes' world had shrunk to the size of a small conference table. Across from her sat the head of HR, a stern-looking woman named Maria Flores, and the airline's chief of security. Her union rep, a harried-looking man named Frank, sat beside her, looking deeply uncomfortable. "I was following security procedures," Caroline repeated, her voice a desperate mantra. "The passenger was suspicious. Her story didn't add up." Maria Flores slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a crystal-clear video, time-stamped and synced with audio. It was the security footage from the lounge. Caroline watched herself, her own face twisted with a smugness that now looked monstrous. She heard her own voice, dripping with a condescension that made her stomach clench. She saw herself snatch the ticket, heard the definitive, catastrophic rip. She saw Maya's look of shock, and then the quiet, deadly calm that followed. She watched the whole thing, right up to the moment David Chen arrived. "Ms. Hayes," Maria said, her voice devoid of any emotion, "let's talk about your file. In the last 5 years, you have had 7 passenger complaints filed against you. 4 for rudeness, 3 alleging racially biased service." Frank, the union rep, shifted in his seat. "Now hold on. Those were minor complaints, all of which were resolved." "They were resolved with a written warning and a note in her file, Frank," Maria cut in, her eyes still locked on Caroline. "Because the evidence was anecdotal, the passenger's word against the senior employees. But now we see a pattern, and now we have irrefutable proof of that pattern, culminating in gross misconduct, destruction of company property. That ticket was legally our property, and the targeted harassment of a passenger." Maria leaned forward slightly. "But let's forget all of that for a moment. Let's focus on the single, most critical failure. You accused a passenger of fraud. The passenger you accused, Caroline, was Maya Washington." She let the name hang in the air. "The daughter of the man who owns this company. The ticket was purchased through his executive account. It is, by definition, the most legitimate ticket one could possibly hold on this airline. The blood drained from Caroline's face. The last vestiges of her denial crumbled into dust. It was true. It was all horribly, nightmarishly true. Her actions put this company at enormous risk, the head of security added, his voice gravelly. Legal liability, reputational damage. It's a shareholder's nightmare. If this had been any other high-profile passenger and it got out to the press, our stock could have taken a 10-point hit overnight. Frank, the union rep, looked down at his papers. He knew a losing battle when he saw one. He was there to protect his members from unfair dismissal, not from the consequences of their own spectacular self-destruction. Caroline, he said softly, they have you dead to rights. The video, the witnesses, the blatant policy violations. He trailed off, shaking his head. Maria Flores slid a single piece of paper and a pen across the table. Aura Airlines is terminating your employment, effective immediately, for cause. We are willing to offer you a choice. You can sign this resignation agreement. It includes a standard non-disclosure clause. You walk away and we list your departure as a voluntary resignation. It might save you some small measure of grace in finding future employment, though I doubt it. Or you can refuse to sign and we will proceed with a formal termination for cause, which will include a detailed report of this incident in your permanent record, and we will contest your unemployment claim. The choice is yours. Caroline stared at the paper. 22 years of service, of pride, of seniority. All of it gone, reduced to a single humiliating choice on a piece of paper in a windowless room. The life she had built, the small kingdom she ruled from the door of an airplane, had been conquered and salted. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She was no longer a senior flight attendant. She was just Carolyn Hayes, an unemployed middle-aged woman with a mortgage, a car payment, and a future that had just become a terrifying, empty void. And the hurricane she was about to discover was just getting started. While Caroline Hayes was signing away her career, Mr. Peterson was sitting in his own first-class seat on Flight 104, stewing. The injustice he had witnessed gnawed at him. He was a retired litigator, a man who had spent 40 years fighting for fairness in a courtroom. He couldn't shake the image of Caroline's smug face or Maya's quiet dignity. Before the plane took off, he pulled out his phone and typed out a long, detailed post on X, the platform formerly known as Twitter. He didn't have a huge following, mostly old colleagues and family, but he was meticulous. He tagged Aura Airlines, several major news outlets, and a few prominent journalists who covered corporate and travel news. He described the incident with a lawyer's precision, ending with, Aura Airlines, your flight attendant, Caroline Hayes on JFK LHR Flight 104, just racially profiled a young black woman, accused her of fraud, and publicly ripped up her valid first-class ticket. It was the most disgusting display of unprofessionalism I've seen in 3 million miles of flying. What are you going to do about it? He hit post just as the cabin doors closed. By the time Flight 104 was halfway across the Atlantic, his post had begun to smolder. But the real explosion came from a different source. A 19-year-old tech influencer who had been sitting 2 chairs away from Maya in the lounge had discreetly filmed the entire confrontation on her phone. She hadn't wanted to get involved, but she knew she had captured something significant. Once she was safely on her flight, in business class, she edited the video, added captions for clarity, and uploaded it to TikTok and Instagram Reels with the caption, Karen flight attendant has a racist meltdown and rips up a black girl's first-class ticket at JFK. Yasha racism, Jakurch, Karen flying while black, Shanna, or Airlines. The video was dynamite. The visual of Caroline, the very picture of entitled authority, condescending to and then aggressively tearing the ticket of the calm, well-dressed Maya, was infuriatingly compelling. It was a perfect 2-minute encapsulation of racial prejudice. It went viral with astonishing speed. Within hours, it had 1 million views, then 5, then 10. Airline Karen and Caroline Hayes were trending. Major news aggregators picked it up. The story was on the homepages of CNN, BBC News, and the New York Times. Aura Airlines was suddenly at the center of a Category 5 media firestorm. Robert Washington was in a crisis meeting at Aura's Park Avenue headquarters when the video hit. The company's PR chief, a sharp woman named Isabel, played it on the large screen in the boardroom. The room fell silent. Seeing the raw, unedited ugliness of the encounter was far more powerful than reading it in a report. Our stock is down 4% in after-hours trading, the CFO announced grimly. The calls for a boycott are growing. This is a brand catastrophe. Robert watched the video without flinching, his jaw tight. He saw the pain flash across his daughter's face, a pain he had tried his entire life to shield her from. Isabel, he said, turning to the PR chief, cancel our ad spend for the next quarter. All of it. We're redirecting that capital. I want a statement drafted. No corporate platitudes. No, this is not who we are nonsense. Because today, this is who we are. I want to acknowledge the failure in its entirety. We will apologize directly to Maya and then to the public. We will state that Caroline Hayes has been terminated, and we will announce the immediate formation of a new, independent oversight committee for diversity, equity, and inclusion. He stood up and began to pace. This isn't going to be a PR fix. This is going to be a root and branch cultural overhaul. I want to bring in the best DEI consultants in the country. I want to review and rewrite our training manuals from the ground up. I want every single one of our 50,000 employees, from the baggage handlers to the board members, to go through a new, mandatory, intensive, anti-bias and de-escalation training program. And it's not going to be a one-off online module they can click through. It will be in-person, rigorous, and ongoing. He stopped and looked at his executive team. This incident has exposed a sickness in our company. I will not allow it to fester. We will not hide from this. We will confront it, we will learn from it, and we will set a new standard for the entire industry. This will be my answer to what happened to my daughter. He pointed a finger at the screen, where Caroline Hayes' face was frozen in a contemptuous sneer. Her prejudice will be the catalyst for our progress. That will be her legacy. The investigation into Caroline's past continued with grim efficiency. They discovered the 3 prior racial bias complaints had been filed by a Black businessman, a Hispanic family, and an Asian woman. In each case, Caroline had claimed the passengers were being aggressive or non-compliant, and with no video evidence, HR had sided with their senior employee. The investigation team contacted all 3 previous complainants. 2 of them agreed to speak with Aura's legal team, their old wounds reopened by the news. A potential class action lawsuit began to seem like a real possibility. The story had another impact. Studies on consumer racial bias, like a well-known one from the Harvard Business Review, that showed significant disparities in how customer service agents respond to names perceived as stereotypically Black versus white, were suddenly being quoted in news articles about the Aura incident. The data provided a stark academic backdrop to Maya's very personal experience, showing it wasn't an isolated event, but part of a pervasive societal problem. Robert Washington ordered his new DEI committee to use this and other data to build a new evidence-based training protocol. Meanwhile, in London, Maya had arrived safely. The silent, luxurious flight on the Gulf Stream was a stark contrast to her earlier experience. She won her competition. Her design was hailed by the judges as visionary and a landmark in sustainable urban planning. She accepted her award with grace and poise, but the victory felt bittersweet. The news of the viral video had reached her, and while she was glad the truth was out, seeing her humiliation replayed for millions of viewers was deeply unsettling. She became, overnight, an unwilling public figure. She was lauded for her composure, a symbol of grace under pressure. But she hadn't wanted to be a symbol. She had just wanted to be an architect. Her father had shielded her from the media, but she knew a reckoning was coming, not just for Caroline Hayes, but for her too. She had to decide what to do with this new unwanted platform. For Caroline, the storm was just making landfall. Her voluntary resignation did nothing to protect her. Her name and face were everywhere. She was doxxed. Her address, her phone number, her personal email were all leaked online. She was bombarded with hateful messages. Friends she had known for decades stopped returning her calls, embarrassed to be associated with her. Her neighbors crossed the street to avoid her. She was no longer just unemployed, she was a pariah. The life she knew was over, and the karma she had so casually dispensed was now returning to her 100-fold. The weeks following her termination were not a sudden, dramatic fall for Carolyn Hayes, but a slow, grinding descent into obscurity and irrelevance. The non-disclosure agreement she had signed in a moment of panic was a muzzle, preventing her from crafting any sort of public narrative, even a self-pitying one. But the video, which had seared itself into the global consciousness, needed no narration. It was a perfect, self-contained story of her disgrace. Her first priority was a new job. With 22 years of loyal service and expertise in a premium, client-facing role, she believed her skills were transferable. She was wrong. Her experience had been rendered worthless by her infamy. She sent out dozens of applications to other major airlines, hoping that the sheer weight of her resume might overcome the notoriety of her name. Most were met with a digital silence. A few, however, led to phone screenings where, a few minutes in, an awkward pause would be followed by a chilly, "Thank you for your time. We'll keep your resume on file." One regional carrier, desperate for experienced crew, granted her a video interview. For 30 minutes, it went perfectly. Caroline was polished, knowledgeable, and articulate. She spoke the language of aviation safety and premium service fluently. She felt a flicker of hope. Then the hiring manager, a kind-faced woman named Susan, looked down at her notes, her smile faltering. "Caroline Hayes," Susan said slowly, the recognition dawning in her eyes. I just placed the name." The warmth vanished from her expression, replaced by a guarded professionalism. "Caroline, I have to ask. There was an incident at JFK earlier this year with Aura Airlines. That was you?" The direct question hung in the air. "I resigned from my position," Caroline said stiffly, the practiced, HR-approved line feeling flimsy and absurd. "I see," Susan said, though it was clear she saw everything. "Well, we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. It's a very competitive field. We'll be in touch." Carolyn knew she would never hear from her again. She was no longer a candidate. She was a liability, a walking PR crisis. The call ended, and Caroline stared at her own reflection in the blank screen, the face of a pariah. With no income, her carefully balanced finances began to capsize. The first sign was the stack of bills on her granite countertop, the same countertop where she had so triumphantly dropped the pieces of Maya's ticket. The mortgage, the car payment, the homeowners association fees, the credit card bills from a life she could no longer afford. They formed a paper monument to her downfall. Soon the polite letters from the bank turned into stern warnings in red ink. She started skipping meals to save money, the gnawing hunger in her stomach a constant reminder of her foolish pride. The social fallout was just as brutal. Her tight-knit group of fellow flight attendants, with whom she had shared layovers in Paris and gossip over coffee for 2 decades, fell silent. Her calls went to voicemail. Her texts were left unread. They couldn't risk their own careers by associating with her. Her neighbors, who once waved cheerily as she polished her car on Saturday mornings, now offered tight, uncomfortable smiles and hurried inside. She was a ghost in her own community. The day the foreclosure notice was officially posted on her front door was the day she truly broke. The shame was a physical force, pressing down on her chest. She spent weeks packing her life into cardboard boxes, each object a memory of a life she had torched with her own hands. Walking through the empty, echoing rooms of the house she had worked so hard for was a torment. This home had been her castle, her validation. Now it was just a shell. She sold it in a desperate short sale, taking a massive loss just to escape the crushing debt. She moved into a dingy one-bedroom apartment complex by the expressway, a place that smelled of damp carpet and stale cooking oil. The thin walls offered no privacy. She could hear her neighbors arguing, their televisions blaring. It was a world away from her quiet suburban cul-de-sac. This, she thought with a surge of bitter resentment, was her punishment. Not just for a single mistake, but for a lifetime of small, unexamined cruelties that had festered within her. One afternoon, standing in the checkout line at a crowded discount market, a teenager holding a phone turned to his friend and yelled, "Oh my God, look, it's the airline Karen!" He raised his phone, its camera lens a merciless eye. Say hi to TikTok. Heads turned. People stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity and contempt. Whispers rippled through the line. That's her? The one who ripped up the ticket? Face burning, heart pounding, Caroline abandoned her basket of generic pasta and canned soup and fled, the sound of the boys' derisive laughter chasing her out into the gray afternoon. She was no longer Caroline Hayes. She was a meme, a hashtag, a public spectacle of bigotry. While Caroline's world was shrinking to the size of her shame, Robert and Maya Washington were building an empire of change. For Robert, the incident was more than a corporate crisis. It was a deeply personal failure. He had built Aura Airlines as a monument to the American dream, his dream. He had faced his own quiet battles against prejudice in boardrooms and banks on his way to the top. He thought he had built a meritocracy, a place where excellence was the only currency. The video of Caroline Hayes proved him wrong. It revealed a rot deep within the foundations of his creation. The Maya project became his singular focus. He didn't just fund it, he drove it with a relentless, almost messianic zeal. "I don't want a Band-Aid," he thundered in a boardroom meeting, silencing a skeptical board member who questioned the $50 million budget. "I want to re-engineer the corporate DNA. This can't be about just protecting the stock price. It has to be about making sure a young woman, any young woman, can step into our lounge and feel not just safe, but valued." Dr. Angela Reed, the sociologist he hired, was brilliant. Her approach was radical. "We can't teach people not to be racist with a PowerPoint presentation," she explained. "Bias is a function of the brain's efficiency. We have to retrain the brain." The new training program used cutting-edge virtual reality simulations. An arrogant, white, male pilot was suddenly in the virtual body of a young black woman being ignored by a gate agent. A flight attendant who prided herself on being fair experienced a flight as an elderly Asian man with limited English, feeling the sting of impatience and condescension from the crew. The experiences were jarring and deeply uncomfortable, and that was the point. It bypassed intellectual defenses and created empathy at a visceral level. There was resistance. Some veteran employees grumbled about woke nonsense and sensitivity training. Robert's response was swift and uncompromising. An internal memo from the CEO's office stated plainly, "This is the new standard of excellence at Aura. Full and enthusiastic participation is not optional. It is a condition of employment." Several employees who refused to comply were offered generous severance packages and shown the door. The message was clear. The culture had shifted, and there was no going back. Maya, in the meantime, had made a choice. After winning her competition in London, she could have easily retreated into the private world of architectural design, her moment of unwanted fame fading with the news cycle. But in conversations with her father, she realized something profound. Her training as an architect was about designing systems for people to live in. Now she had an opportunity to help design a social system for people to work in. She became a senior advisor and the public face of the Maya project. She wasn't an angry victim. She was a calm, articulate architect of change. In media interviews and at company town halls, she spoke about systemic design. "What happened to me wasn't just about one person's prejudice," she explained to a packed auditorium of new employees. "It was about a system that allowed her prejudice to become an action. Our goal is to redesign that system, to create checks and balances, not of suspicion, but of accountability and support." She was instrumental in designing the new in-flight dignity reporting tool. Working with Aura's tech division, she helped create a simple, discrete interface on the seatback screens where passengers could report instances of bias, a dismissive tone, being repeatedly overlooked for service, in real time. The report would go to a specialized team at headquarters, bypassing the crew entirely, creating a data trail that could no longer be ignored or explained away. 7 months after the incident, Caroline Hayes was living out of her 10-year-old sedan. Her savings were gone, her friends were gone, her home was gone. She was at the absolute nadir of her life. One cold, rainy night, she was parked in the far corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot, trying to get warm under a threadbare blanket. She was scrolling through a news site on her cracked phone, looking for job listings, when a video autoplayed. It was a feature story from a major news network, titled, The aura transformation, how one company turned scandal into a model for change. There on the small screen was Robert Washington, speaking passionately about corporate responsibility. Then the reporter introduced the project's public face. It was Maya. She looked confident, radiant, and powerful, addressing a crowd of graduating flight attendants. She wasn't the girl Caroline had tried to break. She was a leader. The report detailed the success of the VR training, showed an interview with a once skeptical pilot who now championed the program, and highlighted the new real-time reporting tool. It ended with a shot of Maya cutting a ribbon on a new employee wellness and education center, named in her honor. Watching that slick, hopeful report from the cold, damp squalor of her car, the last of Caroline's defenses crumbled. For months, she had clung to a narrative of victimhood. She was the one who had been wronged, a casualty of a world gone too sensitive. But seeing the immense, positive, constructive change that had grown directly from her single ugly act of hate, she was forced to confront the devastating truth. Her karma wasn't the loss of her job or her house. It wasn't the public shame or the loneliness. That was all just fallout. Her true, hard karma was this moment of excruciating clarity. She saw that the world hadn't punished her. The world had simply moved on and become better, not just in spite of her, but because of her failure. Her bigotry had been the unintentional seed for a forest of progress she would never be allowed to enter. She had not been a victim. She had been the poison, and the company had, for its own survival, created the antidote. Staring at her own haggard reflection in the rain-streaked window, she finally understood. She hadn't just ripped up a boarding pass. She had torn away her own humanity, piece by miserable piece, until there was nothing left. Carolyn Hayes learned the hard way that the world is much smaller than her prejudice allowed her to believe. Her story is a raw and powerful reminder that our actions, fueled by hate or ignorance, don't just vanish into the air. They create ripples that can either build bridges or trigger tidal waves of consequence. In the end, the dignity she tried to strip from Maya Washington was the very thing she lost herself. While Maya used the painful experience not as a wound to nurse, but as a foundation upon which to build something better for thousands of people. This story shows that karma isn't always loud and immediate. Sometimes it's a slow, quiet, and complete unraveling. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button, sharing it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribing to the channel for more true stories of justice served. What do you think is the most important lesson from this? Let us know in the comments below.